Sometimes you just need to take the slips out and bowl defensively. And you also need to be careful with your computer's defense as well. If you need a VPN, go Nord. NordVPN.com/Kimber to get a 2-year contract with a discount, plus 4 extra months and gifts in some markets. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the show notes. So put in some dot balls and turn them into maidens via NordVPN.com/Kimber. If you make any content, Minvo Pro is the tool for you. Take your long format content and cut it and slice it for social media. This AI-inspired weapon will turn your one piece of work into so many clips. Try Minvo.pro now. Morning, everyone, and welcome to a Wagon Wheel podcast. This is the show where we answer your questions about cricket. The best way to do that is if you're live when we go live, which is now. We're live right now. You can hang out in the YouTube channel comments and put some comments up there. And super chats are the easiest ones for me to find, of course. And then if you can't do that, Patreon is the best way to support our network, really. It's patreon.com/Good Areas podcast. Also, please, hang out on the Good Areas, goodareas.co, which is our website. And if you're on Patreon, you get access to the Discord community and the podcast ad-free, all sorts of other things. Patreon's really cool. But let's start with Person McPersonface, who says, people deride the 100 as being 16.4 over cricket. However, reading around the number of balls per overs, they weren't fully standardized until 1979. Is there an objective reason why 6 is the best and not 5 or some other number? Are there older cricket fans in Australia who complain it should go back to 8 and over? My dad certainly still complains it should go back to 8 and over. I think 8 and over is actually a much better number. I think we should do less switching around. The reason 6 becomes quite big, and the year 1979 is quite important, is that's when cricket becomes more of a commercial enterprise, right? So England had done 6. I still think they were wrong, and they should have had 8 as well. But England had settled on 6 by that stage. And 1979, of course, is around the Kerry Packer revolution, and he wanted to fit more ads in. And you can fit more ads in with 6 ball overs than you can with 8 ball overs. So it all sort of came together at that stage. No one person is to blame, but that is the reason. But yeah, I mean, me and Abhishek Mukherjee made this point a lot when everyone was moaning about 100. This is one of the things, as a historian, people use stats and history wrong all the time, right? So they see something like, or traditionally, it's always been 6 balls. Well, it hasn't traditionally always been 6 balls. It's been 4, 5, 6, and 8. 7 is, I think, the only number that we haven't used in cricket in that run, right? So no, traditionally it hasn't always been 6 balls. So if your argument is that the 100 is rubbish because we don't have 6 ball overs, then you don't know anything about the history of the game. Again, though, that's also why the 100 is quite poorly put together, because that could have been their argument as well, right? They could have made a very similar argument of there's an issue here. Actually, we're ahead of the game because in 18, blah, blah, blah. The 16.4 is still stupid. The 100 is still a stupid concept. Just because it wasn't made to make cricket better, and it wasn't. I would say this whole idea of making it easier for kids to understand. No kids in club cricket are playing 100 ball formats. Well, as far as I'm aware, in the UK. So any kid who plays cricket gets more confused by the 100. I've had to explain it to my son a couple of times because he's like, wait, which one am I? Why is this one different? Because he knows cricket. So yeah, but the actual overall point you're making here is fine. And yeah, so to go back to what I was saying before, so people will use history and stats, but they don't actually know anything. So someone said to me the other day, they sent a tweet to me in Bumble saying, I can't remember what it was, but something had happened in associate cricket where someone had scored a lot of runs, and they're like, this is a joke for the stats. And I was like, well, as a statistician, it's my job to filter out stuff all the time. There is no person who works in cricket stats who is upset by the fact that the Nepalese, was it Nepalese? Yeah, Nepalese made 350 or whatever it was against Mongolia, because we're not putting that in our database. Or if it is in our database, we know how to filter it out. Or if it's in our database and it's filtered out, we actually have the ability to, give it a higher ranking or a lower ranking, like we would with anything. right? Sometimes when you're looking at stats, you're looking at just maybe you want to have a look at someone's stats against the top 4 players. So people do this sort of stuff with history and stats. They're not generally the people who work with history or stats because they don't know the full system. I remember when the day-night test matches came out, and Ian Botham was like, well, this is going to ruin all the old stats because this is a completely different form of test cricket. And it's like, we've had lots of different forms of test cricket, right? Before 1900, that test cricket is nothing like anything that happens after 1900. Even, you could say, before the 1960s, test cricket was very different. We've changed the laws, the stumps. We have played cricket on matting. We have played cricket on turf wickets, all these different things. People need to understand all of that. And that's not how the world works. Rudra says, would Harshal Patel or another slow ball specialist, how would Harshal Patel or another slow ball specialist do in a test match or on a dust bowl? Imagine the grip that they'd get and the movement and faster speeds than spinners would make them hard to play. Yeah, we've seen Mike Kasperwich and Lance Klusener tried this before. Am I missing someone? Venkatesh Prasad, I suppose, would do this on occasion. It's hard as a fast bowler to get any kind of consistent lateral movement. I always thought there was a point at time when Mitch Johnson in the sort of 3rd and 4th innings, and I've never talked to him about this actually. I might try and get him on the podcast and chat to him about it one time. But I thought he was at his absolute best when he was bowling 135k an hour cutters around the wicket to right-hand batters, and I don't know how you play that. And that was my big thing with Mustafiza. If he could do what he did in T20 games in Test matches, he'd be the greatest bowler of all time because he'd be slanting every ball into leg stump and hitting the top of off. And there's just no way you can play bowlers like that. And so I think there is an element for this, and I think we will see this in the future more. But it's so rare that a surface will give you lateral movement. Unless you are Mustafiza, that ability to do it, or, later on in a test match. But I think we'll start to see those skills come across more and more. When slow balls took off in the mid-80s in Australia, Franklin Stevenson sort of starts the slow ball cutter. Australians sort of get it very big on the back of the hand slow ball. So by that point, probably by the 90s, kind of everyone in the world is sort of bowling. Everyone is aware of a slow ball at that stage. You do see them start to come in at times. You do see it at that point start to become more of a thing. So we've already seen limited overswings go back to test matches, and we'll continue to see that. Jasper Bumrah taking Ollie Robinson, was it? Well, that was a cutter. And that's kind of the skill that you were talking about. I don't know if we need a specialist, though. Rudra would be my only question there. Josh says, Mark Chapman's weird T20 record. In T20s against Pakistan, Chapman has scored 541 runs, an average of 45, and a strike rate of 160. Against all other top 10 T20 teams, he scored 521 runs, an average of 17, and a strike rate of 112. Does this mean anything substantial? The only thing I would be interested in is that Pakistan can have a lot of spinners who spin the ball away from right-handers. So there might be a, Chapman, and I haven't looked at Chappie's record in a while, like in depth. I was the one who recruited him to St. Lucia. So back in those days, I knew him quite well, and I knew how good he was against left-arm finger spin. I'm assuming he's still really good against left-arm finger spin, and perhaps those numbers are slightly juiced up because, Josh, if you look at that reminds me of like a Ben Dunk time record. And Ben Dunk was obviously incredible in Pakistan for a similar reason. But I don't know if I don't think the other side of it, 521 runs at an average of 18. I would say that's probably more dumb luck. Mike Chapman's obviously a better player than that. So it's probably small sample sizes have played a bit of a part in this as well. Josh says, say you're in charge of India for the Border Gavaskar Trophy. How many non-player personnel would you want to take? Suggestions, head coach, 4 assistant coach, 2 analyst, physio, sports med. Oh, okay. It's a really good question. When I was the general manager at St. Lucia, I did spend some time, sort of thinking about this. Not that we were ever going to be in a dream situation with a huge budget for anything. I think my biggest issue is that you need a head coach and an assistant coach. Then I want specialist coaches. So I want someone whose job it is to look after batting, someone whose job it is to look after seam bowling, spin bowling, and wicket keeping. those are the biggest ones from a coaching perspective. The assistant coach's backup job is obviously going to be as the fielding coach. I don't know if you need another specialist fielding coach, but if you were doing this professionally with, as you say, as a large budget, I would then also have a specialist fielding coach. I think it's certainly an important enough position to have a specialist for. All 11 players have to field, right? Or 10, I suppose, depending on how you look at the wicketkeeper there. Analysts. I think you can get a bit. You would have a team of analysts. How many you actually need out there? I kind of think the 2 analysts that you've suggested is pretty good. It's very hard to do analysis on the road because you're setting up stuff a lot of the time and then you're taking stuff down. So you're not actually spending as much time doing analysis. Having said that, a lot of that should be done by a team of people back at home, right? Like it shouldn't actually be that many people on the road. So I want someone whose main job is probably, I would almost split the analysis into 2 sections outside of match days. I would have opposition analysis and home analysis. And the home analysis, I want him to be looking at all the training and is there a more efficient way to train? Is there a better way of training for this particular series? The coaches, because the coaches, can forget things while they're out on the field throwing balls and everything. It's like, has this person faced 50 balls from around the wicket yet, or whatever they need to do? So I want that person, and I want the other analysts to be just looking into the opposition. So sneaking into the opposition training sessions. It's not really sneaking, but I don't know what the ethics are of it in cricket. I certainly did it. But watching the other team train, follow the other team's media to see if there's any, tidbits that are coming through that will help you. If there's a journalist in the know who has said something, and coming up with detailed plans and how to get those plans across to the team. So from an analyst point of view, I'd do that. You're obviously looking at physio. You've got sports med. A lot of physios now are also doctors. A lot of people who do physio stuff are quite often trained as doctors as well. So I think the West Indies have that. India have that. So some teams do double up. I think you want someone there for mental health. I think that's fine. Dietitian. I don't think you need a dietitian when you're on tour. I wouldn't have thought. The dietitian plan would be done beforehand. You need a team manager, probably an equipment manager, as you said, as well. Security is another one that you need. Chef is a weird one. Some teams do travel with a chef. I'm not sure there are probably some places where it makes more sense to travel with a chef. So I can get that. But yeah, someone who helps with mental health, I think, is a really important one. I remember one player taking me aside once and he said, look, we have a physio on this. I think it was like a 3-week tour or something that we were doing. He said, we've got a physio on this tour. And he's like, I get it because, someone might just be a little bit stiff or have an issue or whatever. But most people, when they get injured on a tour of this length, are just going home, right? He said, people have mental health concerns every single day and there's no one here to talk to. I think that's a really, really interesting one to look at as well. Niran says, thoughts on Asitha Fernando? How would you describe his style of bowling? He's good with the new ball, reverse swings it with the old. Also bowls Wagner length. Yeah, I think the Wagner thing, I'd be interested. I haven't heard him talk about it. I see him as he doesn't really bowl that sort of traditional test match length. So he either bowls very, very full or very short, which is the Wagner style, right? He doesn't bowl, 5 to 7 meter length all that much. And part of it would probably be because he's a bit short and it might just come on a little bit too much. So when he bowls short and, properly short, it skids through and it's uncomfortable. He's obviously trying to get the ball to swing and reverse swing, so he's going to bowl it full, but he bowls it really, really full. I think he's like a high energy bowler. So by that I mean you watch the ball off the pitch, it doesn't seem to lose that much pace. And even when his balls aren't on the speed gun, marked down as very quick, he still seems to rush people. So I really like that from that point of view. I think he's quite interesting. I think he's a little bit raw still. And I would like him to have something outside of those 2 lengths. I think Wagner, because he was left arm, could get away with that a little bit more. But even with Wagner, sometimes I just felt that I think Wagner would have been a slightly better bowler if he just also been able to use the normal length on the days when he needed to use the normal length. And he eventually, by the end of his career, did that. But by that stage, he couldn't do the other stuff as much. I think with Fernando, you have the option of I just want him to develop that part of his game. I don't want him to ever be his main skill set because he's so much different than other bowlers. He's really exciting. And he's a good bowler with the new ball and with the old ball, right? But what I also want is when he goes to South Africa and New Zealand and England, his ability to pull it back a little bit and allow the pitch to do the work for him. He's so used to bowling on surfaces where the pitch doesn't help him all that much that he's doing all the work. And it's like that. Do you remember when Jofra was at Lords and bombed the Australians, and then the next test match bowled at 82 kilometers an hour, and people are like, what's wrong with Jofra? It's like, no, Jofra just realized that next pitch, what he needed to do was just let the surface help him. And so he pulled back his pace and allowed that to happen. I'm not saying that that's the sort of bowler that Fernando is going to be because they're very different. But you do want the bowler to be able to be like, you don't have to be bowling 101% effort all the way through. You can actually pull this back and let the wicket do your work for you in some situations. And I think that's the one thing that for me makes him a very, very special player, but he's a very, very handy player. You're talking about Vas. I mean, that's not a very good comparison because they're such different kinds of cricketers. But I always thought Vas's best use would have been the into-the-wind bowler, kind of the first change bowler, but more the into-the-wind bowler because you want him to have the new ball, who would then come back and bowl very, very probing spells later on. And unfortunately for Vas, he was the main strike bowler and also the guy who had to plug an end sometimes if no one could help me early. And so I never actually thought we saw the best of Vas because he didn't have the backup, or he wasn't in the kind of team that he should have been. If he was in a better team, I think he would have been exceptional. I think with Fernando, that it's how you match him with the other players, which is exactly why Wagner was so good, right? Because Wagner was matched with two other players who could do the other things that he didn't do. And so it worked perfectly for him. All right, let us take a quick break here on Wagon Wheel, and we'll be back very shortly with more of this. As an international cricket journalist for 10 years, I tell you what, I have got a collection of international SIM cards that I will never truly understand. Now I find there is a company called Sally who gives you an eSIM, and it makes it all so much easier. So if you're planning on making any trips, download your Sally eSIM app, and you can also get a 15% discount if you say good areas, all one word, at checkout. Travel like a pro with your Sally eSIM today. Ian says, Alan Donald ends his test career with 330 wickets at 22 and a bit. Due to the ban, he couldn't make his debut until he turned 25, compared with Dale Steyn, age 21, and Sean Pollock, age 22. By the time Donald plays his test cricket, he is already 5 full seasons at Warwickshire. Did that later start help him or hinder him? And would he have been South Africa's highest wicket taker had he debuted at a similar age to Steyn and Pollock? I think it probably helps him twice. I think the one thing that it helped with him is that he started as a sort of wild express pace bowler, and you can't really be a wild express pace bowler in English county cricket because the wickets don't really help with that. And so he had to improve his skills, his hard skills. And I think if you look at him and Waqar Younis, they both play quite early on. And I think it actually makes them far more useful bowlers into a later age, even as their athleticism dips. Now, Donald's doesn't dip as much, but Waqar Younis he goes from being the incredible twisty man to not being able to do that anymore. But he stayed as a consistent threat in Test cricket because he had, high skill, right? And he, could continually do that. And in Pakistan, he would have been trying to explode people out. And in domestic cricket, it was obviously, in county cricket, it was a little bit different because he couldn't always do that just because the wickets weren't conducive to that kind of bowling. So he had to learn his skills. And I think with Alan Donald, it was even more so because that was his main form of income for many years. The other thing is that if he had played between the age of 20 and 25, he probably wouldn't have had an average of, 22 and a bit. It might be a little bit higher, and it might not be, but my guess is it would be a little bit higher because he still would have been in development. So he would have perhaps still learned all those skills, but he would have had to learn them in Test cricket on the run, maybe playing a little bit of county cricket as a backup. So his development would have been very, very different from that point of view. So it could have, it might have robbed us of the early exciting Alan Donald, which I think it did if you talk to people in those days, but it also allowed him to develop in a way that I think was far more exciting and interesting when it comes to those sorts of things. So there's no doubt there. Oh, I'm just going to take a quick ad break. 1 second. He says, not being able to find his quick ad break. As a cricket journalist, I would travel sometimes up to 200 days a year. I loved watching cricket games. I loved going to new countries. It was an absolute dream. But there was one thing I hated more than anything else about it, and it was this little pin. The thing that I need to change my SIM card in every new country. The absolute worst thing about this pin and SIM cards is when I was traveling to the West Indies, of having to arrive in every new island or country and having to work out if I could still find this pin and then line up and get my SIM card in every single airport. Well, now we have the answer thanks to Sally. They can make it so you never have to worry about this nonsense ever again. They use an eSIM app that once you install once, it is easy, simple, and cheap. Oh, and it works in more than 160 countries. And you can throw these pins away forever because now you just need to download the Sally app before your trip. And if you do it with our code, Good Areas, you get an exclusive 15% discount on Sally eSIM data plans. So before your next holiday or work trip or any time you have to travel to another country, download the Sally app and use the code Good Areas, or one word, at checkout, and you can travel like a pro with Sally. All right. Niran says, what do you think went wrong with JP Duminy's test career? Has there been such a bright start that came nowhere close to its true potential? Yeah, I remember writing a big piece on him early on, and I think it might have been that innings that he played in Australia and how good he was against pace and spin. I've never actually had a look at his overall record in the last couple of years anyway. Yeah, I remember writing about how good he was against pace and spin, and, you know, his footwork was really, really good. I think I have had a look at his first class record, and it doesn't, he has a high average, but I think I'm right in saying that a lot of it is, let's see if I can bring this up. A lot of it is perhaps playing against sort of lesser player in the lesser league, because that's the thing about South African first class records. You have to be a little bit careful. So I'll just quickly look at that. But one of the things I do remember is he doesn't play a lot of first class cricket. So he only ends up JP Duminy with, yeah, so for Cape Cobras, actually his record's really good. For Cape Cobras, he plays 34 matches and averages 60, which is fantastic. So you don't have to worry about the lower levels of South African cricket, because I don't see anything of that in his record here. But what I do see is that JP Duminy doesn't actually play all that much first-class cricket. He's only played 91 matches in his career, and he ends up with an average. Is that right? Is it 91? I think it's more than that, isn't it? It's 108 first-class matches. Sorry. In his first class career, so I don't have all of it here. But that's not a lot of matches, which means that, you know, from 2005 to 2016, he plays 34 matches. And think about that. He was in and out of the international side quite a bit at that stage. So he plays a lot more international cricket than he does domestic cricket. And his record is fine, but I just wanted to see what his record was as a against pace and spin, and because he was kind of seen as a spin specialist, which is not really normal for a South African batter by the end of his career. But I just want to see in Test cricket how that held up for him. No, he's pretty bad against both. He averaged 32 against pace bowling and 32 against spin. So I do think the lack of games is a bit of an issue. I wonder if, weirdly enough, he might have been a player who would have been benefited by playing a little bit more in England. I always thought, though, that I think 32 is unfair, but I never saw him as, outside of that bright star, as a player who should average over 40 in Test cricket. I thought maybe 36 to 38 was the sort of place he would play, but with the odd fantastical innings. But I wonder if part of the reason we didn't see the best of him was he was in and out of the side and didn't play enough first-class cricket beside that. I wonder if that's a big issue. Very interesting to see someone who hasn't been successful in a Test cricket, so played 50 Test matches, averaged 32, but played about as many first-class games separate to that. That's not a normal record. Sriram says, new FTP was with women's cricket was announced recently. And there were multiple new announcements. Like to hear your thoughts. Yeah, I haven't really. Is that FT? Yeah, I haven't really had a look. Dedicated windows for WPL 100 and WBBL tournaments. Yeah, which makes sense. It's really interesting that the women have done this before the men, by the way. I think I remember talking to people and just being like, the IPL just needs a dedicated window. And Indian people were like, well, we're not even going to ask for that. Like, there were lots of people in the comments getting really angry. And I was like, it's already an international tournament. It just needs a dedicated window. And if international teams still want to play in that time, that's also, no one's going to say that isn't the case. But there was that long period where there was this overflow of teams still trying to play internationals while the India were doing that. And it's like, well, what is the point of that? All your best players are not going to be available to you. Whereas, of course, it's very different with the men's 100 and the men's Big Bash in that they have their own overlapping. So it's a bit weird there. But yeah, I like that. New T20 Champions Trophy for women's cricket, but tournament features only 6 nations. Yeah, I think... Look, I don't like the Champions Trophy. I don't mind the fact that the women have an extra tournament. I'm just not sure why they need a Champions Trophy. I'm not sure anyone needs a Champions Trophy, but certainly I wouldn't be involved with that with the women. And the Women's Test Cricket FTP was announced. As usual, the top 3 teams have multiple test matches, along with South Africa and the West Indies women, and still New Zealand don't have one. Look, I don't want to get on another rant about New Zealand. It's ridiculous that that there isn't one, that they haven't played one. I think it's actually upsetting at this point. And I hope that Susie Bates and Sophie Devine don't feel like they have to hold on until, and Leah Tahuhu. But I hope those 3 players don't feel like they have to hold on forever just because it's coming. Just give them a test match. I know it's not cheap to put on a test match. It could be at Pucka Pucka Park. Is it Pucka Pucka Park? My God, Pucka Pucka? I've never forgotten the one with the weird steps. You play it somewhere smaller. I'm sure there are parts in New Zealand where the government would help subsidise it. The local council or whatever would help subsidise as well in order to get a test match. It's a great PR thing. The women players are now stars, right? Getting the women players in, getting Elise Perry or Mitali Raj or Natsiva Brunt, that's a big coup for a small town location that maybe doesn't play much international cricket. But just give your women a test match. It's stupid. It's just a stupid thing to do at this point. I also think it's a little bit backwards. I think it's the opposite of where people should be taking women's cricket at the moment. So overall, I like point 1. Point 2, it's not for me. Point 3, I like the fact there's a lot more tests overall. Just a little bit upset with New Zealand cricket. Adityan says, another law loophole question. Why are England not carrying folks in their squad or India carrying Saha to keep wickets in the 4th innings? Jamie Smith or Rishabh are already done with their batting at that stage, and getting them replaced does not matter anymore. Having a full keeper in the 4th innings is a much more of an advantage than just replacing tired legs with fresh fielders. I think there are playing conditions, and I would have to go back and read them all, Adityan, to have a look at it. But the first thing I would say is that the players would have to be injured. So Jamie Smith or Rishabh Pant have to be injured in order to be replaced. So that is a little bit different. So was it the Indian women's team where the Indian wicketkeeper kept getting concussed and having to be replaced? I'm not saying they did that on purpose. If they did do it on purpose, she kept getting a hit in the head. That's genius. But in general, I think you have to be injured to be able to do that. But it does go back to my whole reserves and deep bench things for the future. But yeah, I'd have to check the playing conditions closer because it's not just about laws, Adityan. It's also about playing conditions. And the Rishabh Pant one, the reason that he was replaced in that other test by Dhruv Jurel is that he was struck externally on the knee. And that's a very, very different thing than even a normal injury. And is treated separately. So I think a lot of people, when they saw that, got a little bit confused. External blows, you can have substitutes without any issues at all. And also you can bat in your normal position. And if you're a bowler as well, you can come back on the field and start bowling straight away. You don't have to do your time. Adityan says, where can I learn to set creative fields? Are there nice resources that you know of, or is playing games the only way that you learn? It used to be more of a thing in a sort of 70s and 80s cricket books, even 50s and 60s cricket books. If you go back, the cricket books would have sometimes field maps in them and be like, this is the field map that you should set up for this kind of bowler or this kind of bowler. I'm trying to think if Brearley talks about it in his book, because he was known for some interesting fielding ones. But I find it really interesting in cricket that, you watch high school NFL players, right, who might not even play that much in college and may not ever make it anywhere near the pros, and they're playing in football in for this high school team. And I get it, high school sports are quite big in America, so I'm not like slagging them off or anything, but like you're watching it and you're going, this kid has to read this entire book, and he has to not only know his moves as a quarterback, but also where he's throwing it to everyone else. And in cricket, we don't do that. And so what I would do is I would set fields for certain bowlers beforehand when I was like 10 and 11. I mean, talk about explaining what your future life is going to be. But I would set, I'd be like, well, this bowler does this, so I'm going to want this field for this guy and everything else. And then sort of show them to my dad. And my dad would be like, okay, but you haven't thought about this, or how are they going to stop? What happens if he drops a short wide one, or whatever, that bowler's sort of issue would be. So the way I learned it was kind of through playing it and doing it. I wonder if there isn't like, isn't an artistic way of getting around this? Like someone just comes out with the big book of cricket fields for different kinds of bowlers. Here's this guy's an in-swinger, for an in-swing bowler who's short, and here's a field for an in-swing bowler who's tall, right? Here's a field for a left-arm swing bowler who swings it, and here's a field for a left-arm swing bowler who doesn't swing it. And you do it sort of artistically all the way through, and so it's got beautiful visuals, and you drop in interviews with players, and maybe even do it with a couple of captains. I mean, Dhoni probably wouldn't want to do something like that. Rohit might not want to do something like that. I think it's the sort of thing that maybe someone like Steve Smith, Pat Cummins, Kane Williamson. I'm trying to think of some other captains, who might be interested in that kind of thing and going through it. But part of the reason in cricket that you learn on the field is that especially in turf games, every wicket is so different. That you are in a situation where it's like you do really have to be. You do actually have to kind of go in the flow. So you'll have fielding positions in a particular game that probably don't exist on any other pitch. But yes, probably playing cricket is the best way of working it out. Ali says, what are the roles of different agents and managers behind players? How often do players change them, and what are their metrics of success? I don't think there are that many sort of managers. I think mostly in cricket we have agents. I know there are some players in Australia and India that have managers, which is a slightly different kind of role. Most players in cricket probably use their agent as a manager. I don't think those two positions are as separate as they are in maybe in some other sports or in like music or movies and things like that. Most agents, it's actually, agents in cricket is really, really interesting. And I would try and break this down as quickly as possible, but I don't think people have talked about it that much. So it is actually worth having a quick look at. Essentially what happens is you come up in cricket and you're a good young player and you get picked up by like a local agent whose job it is to probably get you into your local first class setup and do your original deals there. And also then that you will then be partnered with generally someone else who will be an overseas agent who will try and get you club cricket deals in Australia or South Africa or New Zealand or England or wherever you play club cricket. Europe is another one where we can get those sort of club cricket deals, right? I don't think there's an equivalent for America, which is slightly different. But those sort of club cricket deals. So a good young player would probably already be involved with a couple of agents before they have actually done anything for their state team or their domestic team. And then you go on to the next level where you might go up a little bit. And if you have a good relationship with your agent, you will keep that agent with you. And if not, as you become a national player, you probably look for a major and a national agent. So now you've got an agent whose job it is to sort of look after, big stuff. So they might be able to get you car deals, if you're in India, or that sort of opening of events, opening shopping centers and all that sort of stuff. If you're in the UK, it's kind of more to do with, as I said, sort of car deals and those sorts of things, but also just general advertising. So, you can be the face of this one, or you're going to be linked to this brand, or whatever that may be. So you certainly get those sorts of things happen quite a bit at that sort of level. But then those agents quite often aren't particularly good at getting you T20 deals outside of your country, because that's not what they specialize in, right? So then you might have a fourth agent by this stage, and that fourth agent will be the person who will be plugged into all the different they know who, and there's a bunch of them. There's a bunch of really good ones in the West Indies, who focus on West Indies, but some of which are based in the West Indies as well, or Bermuda and those sorts of places. And they know who all the different coaches are, who owns this team, what that team is looking for, and everything else. Whereas your agent is trying to get you a deal with a car sponsorship, so they may not know about that sort of stuff. So you're already at 4 agents at that point. And a lot of players then will just pick and choose. So they won't have an agent. They will have all these different agents that they'll use for all these different things. You then get, in Asia, this whole other level of agents, which is like, I would say most Asian players I know would have 3 to 4 agents, separate to all the other ones I've already talked about. So they will have a Dubai agent, a UK agent, and probably a home agent, right? Whose job it is to get them free meals everywhere they go, to get them all these deals in all these different markets, to make sure that when they're coming to Dubai, they can get, a week's worth of work, or whatever that may be, or a week's worth of deals or endorsements or a photo shoot or whatever. When they come to UK, again, helping them get tickets to the football, helping them get extra sponsorship deals and everything else, making sure they're at the right, Indian food or Sri Lankan food or Pakistani restaurant, whatever it may be, or Nepalese, or all of them in some cases, but Bangladesh as well. Like, make sure they're at the right restaurant to be seen by the right people and to have meetings and all of this sort of stuff. Helping them out with hotel rooms and all that sort of stuff. So there are Asian cricketers who probably, by the time you know who they are and they're established cricketers, might have been through between 5 and 7 agents. And it's part of the problem, really, is that everyone will say, I once on one day got contacted by by 2 people claiming to be a player's agent at the same time. And I was like, I had to say to the second person, look, I'm not being rude, but I've just had someone else contact me and say that they're this player's agent. So you guys have to work this out. So I think in the end, actually, I didn't even get back. No, I got back to them and said, look, I'm going to work this out with the player. So I contacted the player and said, who is your agent? So it's not great. And it's not set up in the way that you see like an America system and everything else. I think some of the South African players are with IMG through the, I don't know, what is it? The Jay-Z tie-up, Rock Nation or whatever it's called. And so their system is a little bit more American style. There were some other players I thought were signed by IMG, but IMG seems to have sort of backed off cricket a little bit around the world. So we don't have this big, powerful one. Insignia recently got sold. They were like the big T20. So they did like all the West Indians, Rashid Khan. Like they had this incredible T20 roster, but I think they've been sold. Neil Fair, a brother in the UK, is like the agent for a lot of the biggest players that you know of, and a lot of the biggest ex-players. So he ends up picking up all of these sorts of people. I'm trying to think who the biggest agent in Australia is at the moment. It's a guy called James, whose name I've forgotten. Let me tell you what happened then. I was in the middle of my agent story, and this cat stood on the computer and kicked me out of my own YouTube. Thank you, Rodan. Thank you very much. Idiot. There's a few different big groups. Leanne McGoldrick. Is it Leanne McGoldrick? Oh my God, there's two McGoldricks. Yeah, I think it's Leanne, isn't it? The mum. She's like a famous player agent in New Zealand. But it's not like CAA or it's not like American sports or everything else. It's a little bit more like football, I would say. From what I can tell, it's a little bit. There are organizations, but it's a little bit more Wild West because there's so many different countries involved, right? And so it is a little bit. It's a little bit crazy at the moment. All right, sorry about that. I have to just chill out. I'm on it. This is live. Do you understand what live is? Stop licking my finger. All right, let's get to the next question. Ali says, unfaithful clickbait question. Do Indians actually like the IPL as a league? Very few weeks ago on Patreon Discord, we discussed how there is no IPL equivalent of Match of the Day in India. A single highlights program covering multiple recent games with some analysis in between. Instead, there is only highlights of individual games. A possible explanation offered is that the Indian fans hero worship individual players, meaning there is no demand. Did you just move my microphone away? This is unacceptable behavior. This might go viral, but I don't want it to go viral because I don't like you. A possible expression has been Indian fans hero worship individual players, meaning that there is no demand for this kind of program. Do you agree? No, I think the IPL is just very set up very different to football. The games are in prime time. Match of the Day is trying to give you lots of different bits of information because you can't watch or follow all the games, and also it isn't being broadcast. Every game, there's like blackout periods and stuff, isn't there? I think that's still the case. And anyway, I think that's why Match of the Day exists. And I'm not an expert in English football, so sorry if I've got that wrong and someone else understands that better. But that's not the case in the IPL, right? The IPL, everyone has already watched the game. Everyone is aware of the game. I do think, and I can tell you this for a fact because I've tried to pitch these shows to the broadcasters of the IPL before, they are terrified of analysis. And I don't understand why, because I think in India, they want everything that will appeal to a broad market. And so they want everything to be fun lifestyle stuff. And to be fair, I've pitched some of those shows to them as well. And I'm like, I'm not against that as well. But I actually don't think at the moment they're very good at the sort of wraparound content. And part of it is because when do you play that during the IPL season? It actually makes more sense from an international point of view, right? But from an IPL season, it's quite hard because at prime time every night during IPL, there is a game on. So I think part of the reason that we have that is to do with it. I still think there are ways around that, of course. And I think a late night show, I mean, the IPL goes on so late, maybe it's impossible. I think like a late night show that is part comedy and part analysis would be perfect for the IPL. I think there should be, so the show that I've pitched, and I got it to the broadcasters and they kind of agree with it, but didn't want to fund it, is a trivia show, like a sort of, I don't know what you would call it, like a combination between shows like Taskmaster and Takashi's Castle and Spicks and Specs, these different kinds of shows with cricketers and, cricket personalities on there. So you're actually using cricket knowledge to talk about the game, but they are entertainment shows. I think shows like that would work really well. I tried to work with a couple of comedians that I thought could come up with really good shows as well. It just hasn't quite worked at the moment. So I just don't think there's that kind of wraparound culture show is there yet. But it's also because the IPL is in development. And so I think it's a very different kind of world. Is this the right question? Yes. Okay. Bloody says, recently asked a question on Reddit, shout out to Reddit, asking about why this dip in Australian attendance in cricket matches. Many mentioned that most limited overs and international matches are outside of cricket season. Is Australia the only country that only has a 2-month-long season? Yeah, I think so. No, New Zealand. I think Australia and New Zealand, it really is a summer sport. So a big part of, supporting cricket and everything else in Australia is, and to a lesser degree, New Zealand, is around the school year is finished. summer holidays have started and you go off and you watch cricket. So obviously cricket is played outside of those months, but even then the height of cricket is always around December and January in both of those countries. Doesn't mean you don't sometimes get some big things that happen in November and in February and everywhere else. But, you know, the Boxing Day is such a big thing, right? If you knock me out of this again, silly boy. Boxing Day is such a big thing that kind of everything is pinned to that. So it's a very different kind of cricket culture than anywhere else. And even South Africa, I'd say slightly better than that. I feel South Africa is a little bit more summer, you know, summer is not just 2 months, but maybe there's an element of that. And I don't know why the Southern Hemisphere countries are a little bit different to everyone else. Adityan says, loophole question. What stops the bowling team from bringing a crowbar and dinging the middle of a pitch once in the 4th innings of a test match in the subcontinent? They certainly will be more than happy to pay the 5-run penalty. I think it would be a lot more than a 5-run penalty. Again, I'd have to go. When you ask a question like this, there's lots of really good TikTokers. There's an American guy and there's an English guy who do all this sort of stuff on TikTok. And I'm sure they're on YouTube and other places as well, where they explain these sorts of things very, very well. But you don't just get a 5-run penalty for doing stuff like that. Your players would also be suspended. The boards would be in disrepute. Yeah, got that eventually. There are many other things to do, but you've also got to remember laws are just one thing. We don't actually play international cricket under the laws. We play them under the playing conditions, and there will be other playing conditions that, you know, that I'm sure it would be very easy to come up with a playing condition that your team would be suspended or you would lose the game based on doing something like that. But if you want a great story about that, Adityan, there was a club game in Melbourne where Dean Jones's father was playing for Carlton, I think. Yeah, Carlton. Yeah. And Dean Jones's father, and it was I can't remember if it was over Saturday, Sunday, but I think it was over Saturday, Sunday. And on Saturday, his team batted, and on Sunday they turned up to the ground, and someone had left a big block of ice on a good length, which had of course melted out into a big puddle, which meant that at one end it was basically unplayable. So yeah, has been done before. Everyone suspected that was Dean Jones's father. He talks about it in his book, so I'm not. And his father's dead, so he can't sue me anyway. But it's Dean Jones who told me about that story. Well, his book did anyway. Gaurav says, what happened to the Tri-Series? So I get these questions, I reckon, about once a month. So on some area, someone will always get back to me and be like, oh, what happened to the Tri-Series? They were so much fun and everything else. So obviously Australia sort of pioneered them through Kerry Packer, and then they become really big in Sharjah, UAE, Malaysia, Singapore, Kenya was another one that had all those. The issue is that every country is on different time zones to each other. And so in this day and age, when you can make a lot of money out of selling cricket rights overseas, it's a little bit easier to plan. But traditionally, it is not particularly an easy thing to be able to do. But even so, if you have different time zones, it means you're not making the money back. And home fans did not go to see bilateral matches all that much. So you're not making any money from ticket sales. Your ratings are down locally, and traditionally that's how you made your money. So in that early 2000s period, that's what the issue was, right? And after the sort of the golden era of limited overs cricket, people started going, well, what are we doing here? I think it's a little bit more doable now. And I think the best way to do it would be 3 or 4 boards to get together and be like, okay, we're playing a World Cup in so-and-so situation in a little while. We want to get practice together. Let's have a tri-series or a quad series. Let's do it in a place that where we all share the revenue, and we'll sell it to our own individual markets and make our money back. And then we all take 25% each of that. I think you could do it more now than before, but it isn't particularly an easy thing to do. And the reason it stopped doing it is the same reason everything did. But it stopped being making money for people. Let's take a quick break. I'm terrified this cat's going to stand on this computer again. That's not why we're taking a quick break, but I will also kick the cat out of the room. I'm Jarrod Kimber, Wagon Wheel. Hit-wicket is the cricket game backed by Harsha Bogle and me, so you know it's full of nerd energy. This strategic cricket game isn't just about frantic tapping. You make decisions based on how cricket actually works. You've got to set a batter up, right? And you can't hit a 6 from the first ball. Hit-wicket knows all that, and they made a game that makes it work with a few gaming twists in there as well. So play, build, and manage your team, because you are the batter, the bowler, the coach, the selector. I mean, you're basically everything in this game, right? And there's no ads on hit-wicket. So download it for free for mobile and unleash your inner cricket legend. All right. Rudra says, England in their 2010 tests often had a lot of all-rounders, Stokes, Woakes, Moeen, etc., but not much batting apart from Root and Cook. If England were travelling to play a test series in Asia and they couldn't pick Root and Cook, but they could pick Ashwin and Jadeja, how would they have done? They would have been okay, but, I mean, if you can't pick Root and Cook, you're still going to struggle, I think, because you need someone to make the big runs. So my big problem with all-rounders is that there's diminishing returns on all-rounders. So the vast majority of all-rounders are probably players who need to bat at 5, 6, and 7, which means that they're not frontline batters, which means you can't expect them to... I mean, there's a reason why Stokes and Bairstow don't average over 40 in Test match cricket, right? And there's a reason why Moeen Ali wasn't picked as a batter a couple of years earlier, right? They're not quite at that level. So if you have like 10 of them in the side, I still think you need a couple of specialist batters, especially Cook and Root, type level players to be able to help you in those situations. I don't believe in... I just don't believe there is enough, you get enough out of all-rounders that it works. And let's say you stack your entire 11 with all-rounder type level players. So, and I don't know, who would you have? Let's say Bairstow bats at 3 and Jadeja bats at 4 in that situation, right? I'm just trying to work it out on the fly, but those sorts of players. Those players aren't going to be as good as often if they have to go up against the new ball and the harder ball and that, quicker spinning ball as well. And so you get diminishing returns from them, and then you're going to get diminishing returns from everyone else because they're not going to come in when there's a huge platform being set as much. I don't believe in these all-round level teams. I think eventually someone will make it work, but I always thought that it was a big problem that South Africa, they would focus on all the all-rounders, and realistically, I often thought their top 6 just wasn't strong enough. If your top 6 isn't strong enough, I don't think having a number 8 who's quite handy, like a Sean Pollock or a Lance Klusner, is that important, because they are not going to be able to, they're not going to be able to overcome the top order all that much. And if the top 6 is failing, those guys are just going to be in earlier, which means they're not going to be as much use to you. Ben says, I see no reason why India won't dominate cricket until the sun eventually explodes in 30 to 40 years. Okay, I didn't realize it was going to be that quick. Put that on the calendar. 2 whole generations of IPL money are helping grassroots cricket produce more and more talent. Will India need to help other teams get better so they have someone to actually give them a challenge? No, because I think they'll still... Look, we just saw the last Olympics in basketball. Serbia and France almost beat the USA team. There's no money in Serbian basketball. Like, it's a passionate thing, but it's not a lot of money over there. There aren't a lot of people in Serbia. They do happen to be freakishly tall and very gifted when it comes to hand-eye coordination. So I suppose that's a big advantage they have over other people. And France has this incredible basketball culture and a lot of people coming over, from, with African ethnicity. And so they almost have the combination of everything that you need. But you can't compare that to what happens in American basketball, right? And yet, they've still both managed to be very, very good against the USA team at times. They may not be, and that was a great USA team as well. So there are always other ways around that sort of thing. But yes, India should dominate cricket. And I think, if anything, it's overdue. I honestly still don't know where all the money in Indian cricket goes. And I'd love to see open accounts from the BCCI just saying where they spend their money, because I think it wouldn't take much for most of us to go, if you started spending your money here, here, and here, we're not even talking about a lot, you could completely dominate from there on in. That was always the thing with the women's cricket of like, we're waiting for the WPEL to be, the women players to be ready. It's just like, if you make the league and you pay them, they'll get ready because they'll professionalize and they'll get a lot better. And so there are whole parts of India that we have never got the talent out of because Chennai and Mumbai and Bangalore have dominated, right? And the IPL is opening that up. So there should be more talent out there. But it's also up to the BCCI to continually find that. But the IPL owners will play a part because they're now out there trying to find this talent as well. But as far as the other teams, no, they have to, the same way that if you're going up against Brazil or Germany in football, and you're not Germany or Brazil, you have to work out how to be the good team. You have to work out how to make your way. The other teams are up for that. That should be the challenge. And I think there's an argument to be made for the IPL's, part of the IPL success is built on overseas players. And perhaps if I don't know, if Canterbury are producing 2 IPL stars, then that money should be coming back into New Zealand and the New Zealand system and everything else. But that's not really how the world works anymore, right? Maybe there might be transfer fees that are paid in the future. There might be some kind of system that you can do that. So I think they obviously have those in football, and they have that, I think, sometimes in basketball. If you've got a contract with someone, you can buy them out. So maybe if you have a player who is on a 3-year New Zealand cricket contract and the Ambani family want them, they have to be bought out of that contract by the Ambanis, which means that money goes directly back to the board, which would help. From an international point of view, I kind of think that India make a fortune from international cricket. And, you know, the numbers are 60, 70, 80, 85% of the money earned from international cricket is because of Indian eyeballs, right? But that, no matter how you look at, no matter how high you make that number, it's because India is playing a team from the opposition, from a different country, right? So there is an argument within international cricket to share the wealth a lot more. From IPL, as I said, until it gets to contract buyouts or anything, I don't really see how that will happen. I'm very, you watch New Zealand play cricket and what they've been able to do with very little resources, and Ireland, I kind of feel like India just should be a lot better than they are already. And I was writing about that in like 2007 and 2008. I think the structural changes are happening, but there's still some issue. It's such a big country. I think people forget, especially, you know, no offense to you, Ben, but someone from outside the country, it's not really one country, right? You know, it's like, I've always called it like America on speed, because it's moving even quicker than America ever did. But with all these different places that don't share a similar culture or share a similar language in many cases. And so you've got all these different areas that aren't even being tapped into from a talent perspective at the moment, but also from a structural point of view. Ben says, India versus Australia 2008. What really happened with Harbhajan Singh and Andrew Symonds? I've tried looking it up, but you just get vitriol from both sides. What is the truth? And what are the ramifications? I mean, I don't know if we'll ever know the truth. My guess is that Harbhajan Singh didn't really understand the full racial connotations of what he was saying, and he thought he was just making fun of something that people had said to Andrew Symonds. But I don't know if that's true. The Australians certainly believe it 100%. There's the whole story about Sachin Tendulkar changing his comments on it. Sachin has never really come out. You know, we know that Sachin is incredibly politically savvy, so I don't think he's ever going to come out and do that. But there's no doubt that the Australians 100% believe that Harbhajan was saying those things. The political side of it was absolutely fascinating. It's probably changed our sport forever as well. So that's why I think that whole series, because it's not just that either. There was Steve Buckner's umpiring. There was the pact that Anil Kumble did with Ricky Ponting. There was the fact that, you know, some of those test matches came down to the end. There was the Brad Hogg calling, I want to say Sourav Ganguly a bastard. You know, all these different things happened in that series. It was so fascinating. And it was horrendously covered by the Indian media and the Australian media. Like, it was before Twitter and social media really existed. So everyone was playing to their own audiences. And there was a lot of nonsense said by a lot of people who probably looking back would look at some of their stuff and be like, what? Why did I say that? And it's what helped build my career. Me being a neutral, even though I was an Australian, and just going, no, Australia's done this. And no, India has done this, is what separated me from everyone else and fast-tracked my career. So that series, as I've said before, is very important to me. Bloody says, umpires use a light meter to check bad light because it is not safe to bat. Why don't they use the thermometer and hydrometer for temperature and humidity are so high not to be on the field. So thermometer is used. There have been games that have been stopped because it's been too hot before. I don't know about the humidity. It's a fair question. I don't know where we're going with humidity, so I'll take that aside. But there have been games where it has been too hot to play, and I think it's going to. I mean, global warming is obviously a thing, so it's going to keep happening, right? We're going to keep having this come along. But yeah, I don't know how you could do that, but it would just be a general temperature. But I always thought, and cricket is slightly different. But in tennis, they do the courtside temperature, which in the Melbourne Open is always horrendous. Let's call it the Melbourne Open. It kind of is. Most Victorian thing I've ever said, but yeah, I think they do the courtside temperature there, which I think is a really, really good thing, because having played on, hard courts get so hot, and I don't know why you even have hard courts in Australia. It's such a stupid thing to even play tennis on in Australia. But cricket grounds as well, when there's no shade and everything, and you're out in the middle, and sometimes the sun comes back up at you from the surface and all that sort of, reflections and everything from that point of view, I would assume that the temperature out in the middle. So I think they should probably start taking the temperature out in the middle a little bit more. That's it for those questions, but let's get on to see if there's some super chats. Oh, there are, aren't there? Well, actually, I need to get rid of this thing from bloody first, don't I? That's why I usually take a break here, but I feel bad because I disappeared in the middle before, so I won't take a break. We'll just soldier on through. This is how the sausage was made. It was made poorly. Learning to play says, does Motie bowl too many bad balls as a finger spinner? I hear that one of the positives for finger spinners is their accuracy, but I find that Motie often bowls drag downs. I think if you've been watching him in the last 6 months, that's a fair guess. Not fair guess, a fair call. When he was at his best, I don't think this was an issue. He doesn't look like he's bowling anywhere near his best at the moment. He might be batting at his best, but yeah, I don't think he's bowling anywhere near his best right at the moment. He's been really, really disappointing. I think anyone who's on here knows I was a huge fan of Motie, and the last 6 to 9 months, there were times when I was on commentary for TalkSport, and I was saying that West Indies only have one bowler, and it's Akil Hassan. Like, I really didn't trust any of their other bowlers in that game, and Motie is one of them. I think he's got a problem with his length, though. I haven't worried too much about his drag downs, but the fact that he can bowl a little bit short is an issue. But he also overpitches a lot, right? He seems to overpitch. So I don't know if something's happened with his physicality, like he's got a small injury, or, he's not feeling it as well as he used to, and it's causing him an issue. But yeah, there's no doubt at the moment that he's just not bowling the way that he should be. I can't make any excuses for him because I don't know any injuries or anything else. But at the moment, he's not accurate enough. But thank you very much for the super chat. Samit says, a follow-up on your how batting has changed, please. Do you know a reason for so many LBWs going to hit wicket so often? Do you know the reason for so many LBWs going to hit wicket so often? Samit, I don't quite understand that. Could you explain that in the bit underneath? And I think Varun might be able to bring it back up and explain it to me a little bit better. Oh, did I read it wrong? Oh, do we know the reason for so many left-hand batters going? Yeah, sorry, Samit. That was on me, not on you. There you go. Well, I said I got done for dyslexia recently. I think now it's funny how many people I've told. They're all like, yeah, that makes sense. And I was like, really? Why didn't anyone ever mention this to me? I would have got myself tested years ago. No, so we haven't had a look into it at the moment. I don't know if there is a filter on Cricinfo. So Varun might be able to look up all the batters who've been out hit wicket, and we can have a look at the most of them, and see if there's, the people who've done it multiple times, and see if there's any pattern to it. It might have been a couple of left-handers that got hit wicket a lot. It's something I'm very interested in, but it's a really busy time. And, I did that video because it was something that I wanted to do for ages. And I think Varun sent me through one of the graphics, and I was like, this one graphic should be an entire thing because it tells such a story about the change within our game. Just having a look now. Yeah, I don't think there's a normal types of dismissal. Oh, I can do it on Cricket Info. Let's have a look. Look at this. Live work. So, oh my God. I see a thing here. Dennis Compton went out hit wicket 5 times. How did he go out hit wicket 5 times? Dennis Compton was a left-hander, but not a left-handed batter. He batted right-handed. So that doesn't help us. There's one coming up, actually, who I was watching play in the Super 50 the other day. Which is Sunil Ambrose, who he's gone out hit wicket twice of recent times. And I remember I did something about that. Dhananjay De Silva has started doing it. Just having a look. I don't see any. Wait a minute. Arthur Morris is a left-hander. And Brian Lara is a left-hander. Okay, everyone else here is not left-handed. Off the top of my head. All right. I can't think of any reason why Arthur Morris or Brian Lara would. One thing I would say about Brian Lara is he had a big step back, a big press back. So I suppose he was slightly closer to his stumps than anyone else, but I don't see how him being left-handed had anything to do with that. So no. So if you haven't seen the video, it's a fascinating video because we go through the entire history of Test cricket and show how batting has changed and how different dismissals have taken over at different times because bowlers have done things differently and pitches have changed and all these different things. DRS is a big one. But then there's this little bit that I just threw out there, which is that in the 1940s or 50s, there's suddenly just a bunch of left-handers going out hit wicket over and over again. And I can't think of a single reason why that would be the case. I don't even know who to talk to about that. I would have talked to Bob White, but he's passed, sadly. So I can't think of anyone else. Anyway. Thank you for the super chat, Samit. Sorry for the misreading. Surab says, I know you don't cheer for any particular team in cricket. No, I think I still cheer for. I suppose I don't support, is what you mean. Yeah, that's fair. But do you think it's good for you and your career when a team like India loses at home after such a long time in your writings, new cool stories and videos? I think if you go back, it's a hard one. I don't know. You don't want India to be. This is why like a lot of people are like if you just make content in India, you get hits. That's not how it works. And it really, and you know, I think I'm a world leading expert in this because I've done it for so many different companies. That is not how it works. And India just winning games isn't how it works either, because when India is too dominant, you get this kind of thing where Indians just expect to win, so they don't even go and look into why they won. If it's a World Cup or an India or Australia or an England series, I think being too dominant doesn't matter. But I think against other teams, it can play a bit of a part. So from that point of view, I suppose India losing occasionally or even just looking shaky, right? Like I actually think it was one of the more interesting things about this modern Indian side is that at home, and we're talking Test cricket at the moment, but how dominant they were without making many runs, right? So it always gives you a negative, and I don't mean negative in a bad way, but it's not like you're just saying this team is great. Whereas you compare that to the ODI side when they were running through that World Cup. It's like, what do you say about that? People keep saying, you're not saying anything negative about India. And it's like, if you can show me something I'm missing, I'll talk about it. I'm not seeing anything negative here. So I always thought writing about the Test side, people were much more interested because there was batters aren't making any runs and the pitches have changed. And the whole pitches issue was really big. Ashwin is such a popular cricketer. People love hearing about him and Bumrah. So I just felt that it was a really cool period to write about because even though they were winning a lot, you had that. Maybe them losing at home means that the next series at home, but it isn't for another year, changes things. But if they lose a bunch at home, well, a lot of casual Indians sort of move on and just be like, not take as much of their joy from the Indian team anymore, right? Like, I don't know. Fan bases are waves, right? And, I'm very much an expert on sort of Australia, England, and Indian fan bases, but I can't predict what they're about to do because you're not exactly sure what's going to happen on the field. Like, I would never have predicted Bazball. It's been such a wave of, you watch TalkSport. TalkSport are talking about Test cricket much more than they ever have, and they're not getting as many people moaning about it. because people are vaguely interested now, even if they're not massive cricket fans. So it's very hard to tell those sorts of things. So that's sort of one part of it. The other part, Saurabh, is that I kind of felt I had said everything I needed to say about that test side just as they lost. So if you're talking from a narrative perspective, to me, it's almost perfect. Because I did that big piece on how do you beat them at home, using all these old teams and what kind of teams would need to come out. And at the end of that, I was like, and I covered the batters to death. I'd covered Ashwin and Jadeja so much and Bumrah so much. There's maybe a little bit about how the secondary seam bowlers were not quite as strong, but that's a small piece that's not, it's not going to drive me. And I kind of felt like that was the case. And, if you go back when I was covering England, traveling around the world with England quite a lot from 2010 to 2014, I wrote that big piece at the Gabba about how I thought that England's batting had actually been showing signs for ages of falling apart. And then at the end of that series, I wrote the big piece about Andy Flower. And then a new era comes in and it refreshes me. So it doesn't mean I can't write about England anymore, but you kind of need that change of, and I'm talking about as a creative person here, I kind of need that for me to be interested. And if that doesn't happen and the team isn't particularly interesting, I kind of lose interest. So if you go back through my history, I haven't been writing about India as much as I have over the last 2 or 3 years, certainly. And a lot of that is because I found India really interesting over the last 2 or 3 years. There's going to be a period coming up where I may not find them as interesting, right? Now, on this channel or on our channels, they'll still be covered, probably because I have other Indians working for me. In the same way that you'll notice there's quite often a Zimbabwean story or a South African story that will pop up because CS works for us, right? We cover Sri Lanka quite well because Estelle works for us, right? So, those sorts of things are natural. Bayram with Pakistan as well. We've started to get him to write some pieces. He co-wrote the Babar Azam one and the Shahid Afridi one, I think. Shaheen Afridi, not Shahid Afridi. And that's where I want to get to, really, because that's not how I work, Saurabh. The way I work is, what am I interested in? And I sort of did this naturally as, I was the global writer for ESPN, right? ESPN Cricket Info. So what is my job? My job is to work out the narratives of each team and work out when I should be covering this team and when I should just ignore this team. So teams who are on their way up, teams who are doing things differently, teams who are at the top, teams who are sliding down, teams who are at the bottom, but there's chaos. Those are the teams that I would be writing about regularly. Teams kind of stuck in the middle. Teams on a very slow, gradual decline. So there was a period where I wrote heaps about New Zealand. And before this series, I hadn't written as much about New Zealand. I'd backed off New Zealand because New Zealand was no longer a story for me. But if you noticed, actually, maybe that's not quite true. Well, no, if you noticed, a little bit more Bangladesh content starts coming up because suddenly I'm more interested in Bangladesh at the moment. So that's how I work it in general. So the Indian team is covered in such a brilliant way that it's almost like the Lakers or the Boston Celtics or Man United. If you're in my job, it's almost impossible not to have an opinion on them because there's so much more content coming at you, right? So I quite often don't seek out stuff. There was that big piece on Indian number 4s. I thought for years that, in ODI cricket, I should say, I thought for years that was absolutely nonsense. Like, it was boring and I wasn't interested in it. But it just kept coming at me until eventually I was like, I'm going to have to do it. And it's the same with the Babar Azam piece, if you be honest. So sometimes the audience dictates this and you're just like, I'm going to have to look at this. I'm going to have a look at this now. But it's not how I work as a person. So, but the other thing is that India losing at home, I think there's a refresh. And so they were interesting up until a point. And I think it was getting a bit boring that they were winning so much. And now that they've lost, that refreshes it. And we might also get, on top of that, a side in transition. So that will be interesting again to me. So they should stay interesting for a while. Let's say they lose their seam bowlers and they become a home-dependent team who doesn't really punch away from home, and Bumrah's not bowling for them, and they don't replace a Bumrah. I could see myself definitely being on the wane with that team. There were certain times in the last 17 years when I haven't covered India as much, right? And there are times when I cover Pakistan a lot, and then there are times when I don't. There are times when I cover West Indies a lot. It's just the natural cycle of these things and how they go. And I'm a different kind of sports writer. most sports writers are more beat orientated, right? And so they are not creatively driven. George Dobell will say, every time you ever ask George Dobell a question about something, he'll say, I've already written about that 5 times. And he probably has, right? That's not the case with me. And it's one reason I love covering a little bit of women's cricket and associate cricket and everything else is like, I kind of feel like I have about, and you throw in the IPL teams, about 40, 45 different sites that I can keep a bit of an idea on. And so if one team gets slightly less interesting, I can just cycle on to another team for a little while, right? Like I'm always being refreshed. And it's one thing I really like about the way that my job is structured, or my business is structured now. Ekant says, how do you handle bad faith takes? How do you decide which ones to address and which one to let go? I don't talk about takes all that much, Ekant, I think, if you go through my stuff. And quite often someone will say, oh, what do you say about Michael Vaughan? I'm like, Michael Vaughan doesn't always believe what Michael Vaughan says. I know these people. There's a really interesting one going on at the moment with Sanjay Manjrekar and Boria. And Boria has called Sanjay Manjrekar out as someone who always comes up with something different to say. As if that isn't just Sanjay Manjrekar's personality. And it's like, he's trying to stand out from the crowd. I've been outside the grounds when Boria has screamed at the top of his voice just so people would hear him. And Boria's whole career is performance art. Not to mention that Boria has done things that are not completely ethical from a journalistic point of view many different times over. And I'm not having a go at Boria, but when Boria says something, I know him well enough to know the full history of Boria, right? Like, I've met Boria. I've been on his shows. He's been on my shows before. We used to tour heaps together. So I know when Boria is saying something, people really get upset about the grade cricketer guys. I'm like, I know the grade cricketer guys. Like, if they say something, it's probably just they're saying it for laughs. They're probably not taking themselves all that seriously. So I'm not too worried about that. I know that Michael Vaughan wants attention and he's realized that he can be like a cricketing Piers Morgan, and he's sort of riding that wave, right? Him and KP are both sort of going after the same sort of ground with that sort of stuff, right? So if that's the way that they've gone after it, that's fine. I respect that, because it is really hard to build a career if you are Sanjay Manjrekar or Michael Vaughan or Boria or all these. It's not given to you. You have to go out and do it. And a lot of these people have worked out different methods to be able to get attention. You look at someone like Monty Panesar, who's desperate to make it in the media, and how hard it is for him as a really good test player to consistently get work in the media, because it's not his main skill. Right. And so the people who have worked it out, people like Damien Fleming and Simon Hughes and those sorts of people, you can disagree with any opinions of any of those people. But I love the fact that they've found niches for themselves that work. Right. Because I know how fucking hard it is. Right. And I'm someone who's managed to do it without playing test cricket. But for some of these guys, it's even harder to do it as cricketers because, you weren't very good. Just like, oh my God. It's like, this person's still bowled 50 to 100,000 balls in games, and probably more than that in training sessions and as a kid coming up. Like, they know cricket. So I don't really worry about all that. Everyone's got agendas, and there's lots of different. I had a kid comment on me today, and he's really upset with a bunch of stuff. I shouldn't say kid; he might be an adult. But a person on Twitter comment today. He's really upset with something that I said, which he's kind of taken wrongly from a video, because he hasn't seen the full video. He's just seen the short video, which is fine. And then he he brings up Willow Talk podcast and the Grade Cricketer podcast. And he's just like, Australians are saying this. And I was just like, those are not Australians. Those are at least 2 different podcasts. And they have their audience, which they are working towards. And you have your beliefs that you're looking towards. Getting upset at what other people say online, it's why I'm not on Twitter anymore that much. It's why I really don't worry about social media that much. And I try and say to our group when they're writing, sometimes I say, you're writing this piece for Cricket Twitter or Cricket Reddit. We don't care about Cricket Twitter and Cricket Reddit, right? We care about fans in general, but we don't care about their agendas. What is the story that we are trying to tell? And what is the best way to tell it? Putting this caveat in just so that people won't comment under the line about it is not worth making the content for. So you have to go out and source the information and do the best work possible. There's always going to be people who realize that they will get there. Do you remember there was that woman, and I don't remember her name, but people started asking me lots about her, and I'd never met her before. I think she's from Melbourne, but she's certainly from Australia, who suddenly got really big on like BJP cricket Twitter, right? So very right-wing cricket Twitter with her takes. And it was like, and people asked me about her and they wanted me to denounce her. And I was like, why would I denounce someone I've never met and have no opinion of? And like, I'm not denouncing people. It's such a weird thing to ask of someone. But the truth is that lots of people like her, and I could go through heaps of them. Dennis Does Cricket was another one, right? Heaps of these sorts of people actually end up without careers because just having hot takes and just saying these things, you have to be able to back it up with demonstrable skills, talents to be able to make it in this market. I'm out here trying to get better at all the things that I do. I'm not going to worry about what Michael Vaughan said or what Rodney Hogg said, right? Or what some random commentator said when they slipped up or whatever. I'm probably going to be more interested in the conversations and the stuff that we do here because that's what this channel is about. Which cricketer has aged the best? Can be different people based on skill, personality, even attractiveness. Well, Wilfred Rhodes probably was the one who aged the best. Graham Gooch is a really fascinating one, isn't he? I think you make a claim that before 30, he's a very ordinary Test cricketer, and after 30, there's greatness in some of his cricket. Like he jumps such a big level into such a late age. I suppose Yunus Khan didn't really do that, did he? Like people like Yunus Khan and Sachin, they found a way to score runs later. I wouldn't say that they like perfected it. Jimmy Anderson's probably another very good one. Rangana Harath. I don't know about attractiveness. Who's more attractive than when they played? Oh, I can't even think of a single player. There must be one though, right? But I'm not sure I can help you there, Ecamp. Last one. Hi, Jarrod. Who in your opinion is a better Test batter? Tendulkar 2000-2013 with 10,080 runs at 52.23. Or Kohli with 9,040 runs at 47.83. So I don't really want to split this up. I would say that Tendulkar was much better in the 90s than he was in the 2000s. And the reason why his 2000s numbers look so good is because the pitch has got a lot flatter everywhere in the world. And he cashed in quite a lot on that. Not to have a go at him, because as I said, I think his 90s work is underrated and his 2000 work is overrated. So overall, he's probably correctly rated. But Tendulkar in that 2000-2013 period didn't have to deal with the wobble ball or really DRS, and certainly pitches aimed towards everything else. So if you just look at it the way you've put it up, that 52 compared to that 47 is not a fair and accurate way of looking at it. I'd want to look at the match factor ratios of what the other players in those games were doing, and I'd want to look at the era ratios as well. And then I'd feel a little bit more comfortable with it. But yeah, so there's so many extra things that you need to look at with something like that, because those are very, very different periods. I'd say that Virat got about 5-6 years of great batting conditions, and at that stage, his peak was about as high as anyone's has ever been. Like it was that sort of Ponting. I'm trying to think. Ponting, there's about 3 or 4 of them. Is there Viv Richards level peaks? Right? We just like, oh, okay. We need to shut this down. This guy's on their own. Steve Smith is another one, right? And then after that, he runs into 2 really, really interesting things. Home pitches that are not made for him to make runs, and away conditions with a reinforced Kookaburra ball that make it very hard to make runs as well. Tendulkar doesn't have to do any of that between 2000 and 2013. So that's why overall averages, we've got a whole chapter about this in the book. Overall averages are such a misnomer, because Victor Trumper averages, 39 in Test cricket? Victor Trumper is not a 39 average Test level player. He's quite clearly worth a lot more runs than that. There's still holes in Victor Trumper's career. Well, there's an interesting one. So match factor straight away for Sachin. suggests that those pitches were pretty good. And for Kohli, that his 47 is actually worth more. So there you go. Varun just on the fly like a ninja. He also made it green to match the super chat. It's the kind of man Varun is. But yeah, it's why Victor Trumper and WG Grace and those sorts of players are actually still worthy of talking about as the greatest players of all time. And it's also why when we talk about openers, there's usually like a bit of an opening tax, especially from openers not from Asia. But even the openers from Asia, when they have to go overseas, they still have to deal with a new ball a lot, right? Swinging and seaming and all those sorts of conditions. And we don't factor that in, and we have to factor all those things in. So I think it's much more fair to look at things from that perspective than it is just to look at the overall average, which is probably why you asked the question. That's it from me. The cat is gone. We have no more. We will have no more interruptions on a wagon wheel. Thank you to everyone for coming in. I will be back very, very soon with more stuff. I'm trying to think what else. I think yeah, I've got a bunch of red inkers coming up. Actually, I got Himanesh coming on finally. I've got some other friends coming on and some other people who've told me they will get back to me who are playing in some cricket leagues who want to come on and chat about some various things as well. On the main channel, we've got a Butler video coming up, which is quite fun. It's kind of analysis, but it's also fun analysis. Fanalysis. We've got that coming up. We're looking at the greatest number fives in Test match cricket history. We've got a video on Shakib coming up as well, and a video on how to beat Australia in Australia and how it's changed, which I think is really fascinating as well, which I'm kind of halfway through. I'm looking at my whiteboard now. Yeah, it's about halfway through. It's about a quarter of the way through. I'm not very far through this video actually at all. I did a graph on the whiteboard. The more things change, the more things they say the same, but the more things change. Anyway, thanks to everyone. Go over to goodareas.co. Check out all of our written work and everywhere else. Like, subscribe, tell your mum about us, and we'll be back again soon here on The Wagon Wheel. I have a book out with Abhishek Mukherjee, and it is called Overthrowing Cricket's Empire. And it's about the stories of how each team beat England for the first time. We go all the way back to the demon Fred Spofforth getting annoyed at WG Grace for acting a little bit like Alex Carey. And then we come all the way to present times with Rashid Khan's England's redemption. We cover every single team to beat England in a major international, but we also talk about the